little Sierra is our little passer outer, so if you need a pen or something back there, by all means. I apologize, our printer messed us up, and you'll have to like flip it when you flip it over. So if you're OCD and like that, just think of it like over the if you're taking notes. So week number 2 here, and last week we did it. We'll do it again this week. He's got a video to kind of help us set it up, and he will sort of review with us. So I'll let him set this up for us before we get started tonight, and then we'll jump in to chapter 2. And so I hope that I know he sets it up well, so I'll just let him do what he does.
Hey class, and welcome back to week 2 of studying the book Stop Trying, Growing a Gospel Identity. And by now you have worked through chapter 1. It's a loss of a sense. We'll move on today to chapter 2, and we're going to dive a little deeper into what is a sense of self. What is identity? It took me a long time to wrap my brain around this. It's a very real thing, but it's a psychological thing. It's an intangible thing. It's somewhat ambiguous, okay? So it's there. It's really driving your life. Out of it are the issues of life. So today we're going to have a definition of identity, and it is how to diagnose. Get yours. Maybe that's the best way to say it. It is your source. Acceptance is who affirms me, who loves me. The second is security, and that is what provides for me, what anchors me, what gives me a sense of stability and durability in life. The third word is significance, and that is where do I find my meaning and purpose? Usually that's in what we do. So our acceptance is usually from our family, friends, tribe, people group. Our security is usually in our resources, which usually comes from our career or vocation, which is our significance. Often we define how many, but a long list of this color, this gender, you are of this nation, of this town or state, you do this, you operate in this way, you've gone to this school. So these are categories. Okay, now here's what you need that they may be true of me, but they cannot sufficiently or comprehensively define me. Okay, that's where they're elevated too high. But so often the world wants to take whether God-given or man-made categories, the world and the devil and our flesh wants to elevate them to supremacy. And the idea here is that these may be contributors and maybe factors that contribute to the identity of who I am, but they certainly do not exclusively or comprehensively define me. So the world presses us, frankly, to idolize or to deify these categories or these factors, and then to divide against each other based on these categories. The world, we'll see later, also wants to make these categories, some of them, fixed. So, it's important to remember these categories may be true, but they're not comprehensive. They're not to be idolatrous or supreme, and they cannot completely define me or exclusively define me. In other words, I'm more, and you are more than all of these things. You're more than all these things put together. You've got to something broader, something deeper that defines you. But I think today's study is going to give you a sense of what it where right now is your identity resting, and why do we feel loss, or why do we feel a fragile sense of self when these things don't come together. Okay, so I hope you have a great study today, and then into chapter 2 and really begin to unfold what it means to understand your deepest sense of self, your core identity. Remember, we're still in the diagnostic phase of understanding what is identity, and getting our minds and brains wrapped around this. And this is going someplace really big and really for the long-term transformation in your life. So blessings on you. Enjoy the study.
There you go, haven of rest. We went too far. So. All right, so I hope that helps in as far as setting it up. Just by way of review, last week we were in the topic of loss, experiencing loss. And so, like he said, and what we closed out with is our identity. It's that deepest idea of who you are. It's the story you tell about yourself. Usually it's validated by two voices. Internal, which is what I think about myself, and external, which is what others say about me. Obviously this is incomplete, but we are going to get to that in a future lesson. But identity formation is identified as what we trust to build ourselves. So the title, as you see there tonight, is Splinterville, Facing Our Fragile Selves. It's almost a tongue twister, if you will. But we're going to take and just really a closer look at the guys that followed Christ, the entire Christ's entire ministry, and really how they, in and of themselves, had to face their fragile selves, and kind of come to grips with in different ways their identity crumbling, if you will. So Habakkuk, is it listed on your paper there? Habakkuk 3. Not often do you get to visit this book, okay, in Scripture or in church, but it's there, and it means something, especially tonight. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall the fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the field shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of salvation. The Lord God is my strength. He will make my feet like hinds' feet, and He will make me to walk upon mine high places, to the chief singer on my stringed instruments. So what we see there is the idea that even though the writer, obviously, Habakkuk, showing that even though there's not going to be any fruit seemingly in these different areas, the joy, the rejoicing that we should find should be in the Lord. And ultimately that's where we're trying to head with all of this. And I know that's probably spoiler alert, but like he said, this is kind of the diagnostic phase of this lesson, if you would. So as we talk about this to start off with, I don't know how, I meant, can I grab one just so I can have a reference here? Okay, so we have Peter's balsa wood identity. Okay, so here you go. Where's the extra ones? There we go. I'll take that one. I don't want to steal one from somebody. I know that these are a little bit set up a little bit different to make sure I expound where it's needed to be expounded. So Peter's balsa wood identity. Balsa wood identities are constructed when we shape ourselves, our world, and even God to our own ideas. We even shape His Word to mean what we want it to mean. We try to create ourselves rather than embrace how we are created. And we write a script rather than receive one from the author of the story. Now, I think that that's a really good diagnosis for where we often land if we're not careful. I was reading in some of my Bible study this week, and one of the commentary writers said, sometimes we tend to study the Bible for what we want it to say, as opposed to what it's trying to say to us. And I think that, by and large, it can be the almost the Achilles heel of studying Scripture, because we come at it with our own ideas and really this identity, and we allow that to shape our idea of the Word of God. So just be careful with that. And so what we're looking at tonight is how these men, especially the followers of Jesus, the apostles, did in fact have that experience of that crumbling beneath them. So first of all, you see it written down there that he believed, or they believed really, that Jesus would fulfill their dream in that bringing a revolution to the Roman oppressed Jews. Now you know the story. The Jews were looking for a Messiah to come and take over the kingdom, set up the kingdom. And so when Jesus selected these guys, these 12 guys, they all of a sudden began to think, maybe just maybe I'm the next one. And we have this story in verse, Matthew 20. Are you there? Do you have it in your notes? I don't know that you do. It's a familiar story when James and John's mama came to Jesus, verse 20. Then came to him the mother of Zebedee's children with her sons, worshiping him and desiring a certain thing of him. He said unto her, What wilt thou? She saith unto him, Grant that these my 2 sons may sit, the one on thy right hand and the other on the left in thy kingdom. But Jesus answered and said, Ye know not what ye ask. Are ye able to drink of the cup that I shall drink of, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They said unto him, We are able. He saith unto them, Ye shall drink indeed of the cup, be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and on my left is not mine to give, but it shall be given to them for whom it is prepared of my Father. In verse 24, then when the 10 heard it, they were moved with indignation against the 2 brethren. So we understand that these people, the James and John, if you would, of the group, the bunch, Mama shows up and says, Hey, would you, kind of like let them be the ones to sit on the right hand, on the left, and make them the leaders in your kingdom, if you would. And then the other guys obviously thought, well, now hold on a second. Why should you get this? Why should it be you? And actually Luke tells us that there was a strife among them which should be counted the greatest. So they were looking for status. They were looking for position, if you would, looking for power, if you would. And I think we can probably relate to that in some of what we do. Next, not only did they believe he would fulfill their dream, they also believed Jesus needed him. To me, this actually falls really, if we're not careful, when we walk through our life. We go to church, we think, man, we're doing God a service. We're really checking the box for him. And so we use that, okay? Maybe I'm just speaking from experience here or testifying here, but sometimes we try to use that as pull. Like, okay, God, I was in church yesterday. I read my Bible, read 5 chapters. I did this, I did that, and it's like he needed us to meet our needs or whatever. And that's really not the case. For example, Peter promised to fight to protect him. In Matthew 16, Peter took him, began to rebuke him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. In other words, Jesus was trying to lay out, they're going to come get me, they're going to crucify me, and it's all, really, that's how this is supposed to play out. And Peter said, that's like, I think it's funny that Matthew used the terminology, rebuke him. Like, Peter, you rebuking the Lord? So how many times have we found ourselves maybe in that particular setup where we rebuke the Lord? Like, God, don't you understand? This is what I am. This is who I am. Then he promised that he would be the most loyal. In Matthew chapter 26, Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Then likewise said all the disciples. So the disciples were like, I ain't doing it either. Peter's like, I ain't, you said I'll deny it, but I'm not. And these guys might, but I'm not. And the disciples, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And we've talked about that before, haven't we? How it's easy for us in the moment, in the heat of the moment, or not even really in the heat of the moment, but just we're in church right now, and man, there's no way I'm going to deny you. But man, we get amongst our friends and our family, in that world environment, maybe the context that we face day in and day out, and we do. Now we're going to get to that in a second, but it's funny to me that one, he thought Jesus would fulfill his dream, and we all kind of feel that way, don't we? Sometimes we feel that Jesus is, he's my good luck charm, and I have this dream, and I'm just ready for you to fulfill that dream for me. Or maybe, just maybe, God needs me. Now, I know that's kind of I don't know, it's an oxymoron, because he does need us. He wants us to work for him. He wants us to serve him. He wants us to have relationship with him. But in this sense, like Peter, trying to really step out, and I'm going to fight for you, that's really not. Jesus doesn't need that for us. Ironically, I like this statement in the book here. Ironically, Peter was trying to save Jesus, but actually, Jesus came to save Peter. For the sake of understanding our own identity journeys, let's trace the defining of Peter in Scripture. His identity formation as a Galilean, a poor kid in a scorned Jewish subculture. Later in life, he became a successful fisherman, providing for his family in his hometown of Capernaum on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. It wasn't spectacular, but it was a successful business and a beautiful place. After Jesus' invitation to follow, Peter's identity process pivoted. He began to identify himself as a revolutionary and a future cabinet leader in Messiah's kingdom. For a couple years, Peter's sense of self grew larger and his identity seemed strong, but deceptively so. It was self-strong and full of pride. It was artificial, strong in appearance only, and deeply fragile and ungrounded. Peter hijacked God's narrative and built his own version of self. We tend to do the same thing. That night outside Jerusalem, ironically, Peter presumed he could be the Savior of the Savior. Hours later, he was just a failure, embarrassed and humiliated. Some days later, Peter reverted back to being a Galilean fisherman again. Imagine all these identities disintegrating in Peter's mind. After he denied Jesus and locked eyes with him, Peter ran away and wept bitterly. Peter faced total brokenness. This was more than sorrow or regret, more than confusion or fear. This collapse of self was both psychological and spiritual. Peter felt invincible, but discovered he was more vulnerable than he ever knew. By the way, so are we. I think what we have to keep in mind in all of this, Peter's story is right out in front for us to really read and understand and see. But look, I know we've already walked through this at different times in church and so forth. But God is really good at using the most radical of examples and then bringing redemption to that story. So when we see Peter, we have to look for these elements of ourself in that. Because obviously, though he made this promise, I'm going to stand up for you. I'm not going to deny. These guys might, but I won't. I'm not going to deny you. We will ultimately find ourselves crumbling in that. So we can look at his story, and perhaps you identify with the strong Peter. Okay? You know who you are. And you're flourishing with confidence. Yeah, that's me. I got it. I'm very confident in who I am. I'm never going to deny Christ. Or maybe you identify with the weak Peter. You've lost your sense of self and are floundering in confusion. Peter's constructed self was both vulnerable and deceptive. His success was not durable, and his failure was not final. Neither his strong nor weak self truly defined him. His strongest, truest identity hadn't yet emerged. And we know that. We'll see that as we move along. And that's kind of the point. We're slow walking through this, just trying to really grasp the idea of where are we getting this identity. So Peter's moment, what we're calling the chapter calls it Splinterville moment, was that when it really boiled right down to it, he actually didn't save Jesus. In John 13, Peter said unto him, Lord, why can I not follow thee now? I will lay down my life for thy sake. Jesus answered him, Wilt thou lay down thy life for my sake? Verily, verily, I say unto thee, the cock shall not crow till thou hast denied me thrice. Then, in John 18, then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. We know the story. Peter, now, if you back the story up a little bit, and scripturally speaking, Jesus had told them, we're not coming with the sword. It's not time. We're not fighting. In other words, they thought, back in the days of Israel and back in the days of old, they went through and they fought with swords, and they defeated entire cities and nations. And so surely that's what we're going to do. And no, put up thy sword. It's not the time. And he had already been told, but yet in that moment when those people came, and Peter says, I'm going to do it. And he wields that sword and cuts off his ear. And most people jokingly say he had bad aim because he was trying to cut off his head or something like that. But regardless, he didn't save Jesus. And then, as he began to curse, Matthew 26, he began to curse and swear, saying, I know not the man. Immediately the cock crew. Peter remembered the word of the Lord, which said unto him, Before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. And he went out and wept bitterly. So he denied Jesus. Didn't save Jesus, as he promised. And he denied Jesus, and then he deserted his commitment. Peter followed afar off into the high priest's palace and went in, sat with the servants to see the end. When Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. So, that's Peter's story, right? Starts off strong. Jesus shows up on the shores of Galilee sometime in Peter's working days and calls out to him. Hey, Peter, come follow me. Remember that story? Have you caught anything? No, we haven't caught anything. He said, okay. He said, I tell you what, launch out a little bit and cast your nets over here. And it's funny to me that the fishermen of fishermen, right? These guys knew what they were doing, had to be told by this man from Nazareth, cast your net on the other side. Of course, again, if somebody did that to us and showed up to our job that we are good at and we know what we're doing and tries to tell me what to do, what would we think? And that's more than likely what Peter felt. But he did it anyways. And when he cast those nets, the boats began to sink and the nets began to break. Why? Well, obviously Jesus, just like that moment, was completely shredding Peter's, what he would know as his external identity. That was his job. That was his career. His identity was that. I'm a successful fisherman. So let's move on. I'm going to read this real quick and then we'll move on. He says, success or achievements cannot define us. Why? Because they are insufficient to give us fullness of identity. They are temporal, fragile, and reversible. Failures and regrets cannot define us. Why? Because we are more than our failures, and those failures are subjective based on who measures us, who we are compared to, and how we respond. If we allow failure to define us, it will crush us. So this is why loss becomes the first formational step toward a strong identity. Like Peter, we need to lose or at least reorder the fragile things that define us. Both successes and failures. Thankfully, loss is not final or ultimate if Jesus is authoring it. It's merely the first step in a beautiful process of being made new. So, let's talk about our identity, okay? So, in light of what Peter's journey, if you would, and how that became deconstructed for him, let's look at how ours is. And he alluded to this in the video, but our identity, it's right there in the first column there, of if you're following along in your notes. I don't have my notes anymore. I lost it. I put it somewhere else. So, the identity is sourced from three things. First of all, acceptance. Do you guys see that? Is it? Okay, there you go. Which, who accepts me and why? Which is my strongest source of affirmation. Security. How I'm held together, or to whom or to what do I look for stability? Significance. What gives me the validation or sense of value? What makes my existence meaningful? So how you answer these questions is how you invisibly construct and maintain your identity. Now, broadly speaking, and we're going to talk about these next few categories to really finish this lesson up. But broadly speaking, we look to four sources for acceptance, security, and significance. So let's dive in. First of all, we look to people, or who affirms me, who validates or affirms me. That's our first sense of security and significance. The inherent problem in this is we look to temporary things to give us permanent solutions. We look to others to accept us. We look to our abilities to validate us. We look to our material possessions to secure us. And we look to our personal desires or dreams to give us significance or purpose. All of these sources are breakable or changeable. People change their opinions, fail us, or abandon us, or ultimately pass away. Abilities wane, or opportunities to use them are long lost along with demotions or illness. Desires are fickle and can change or mislead us. So consider this. Your earliest identity. I am who affirms me. This primarily comes from our family of origin and the nature and quality of loving relationships. For example, I am a son or a daughter. I am loved or I am unloved. I am nurtured or neglected. I am cared for or abandoned. Later, these relationships morph or expand. I am a friend, or I am a boyfriend, I'm a girlfriend, I'm a single person, an adult, a fiance, a husband, a wife, a mom, a dad, grandparent. The quality of love we received, or didn't, from these relationships powerfully defines either a strong or weak identity. We subconsciously rationalize, I'm loved, therefore I am valuable. Or, I am not loved, therefore I am unvaluable. This begins to show the intrinsic brokenness of the affirmation process. If I am loved, I have a strong sense of self. If I am not loved, then who am I? I mean, that kind of seems reasonable, right? Most people feel that way. I got to be loved, or I got to be affirmed in that. Human love can give us an identity, but not a strong one, and definitely not a permanent one. Why? Because human love is often conditional, sometimes fickle, and always temporal. For Peter, this would have included not only his nationality as an Israelite, or his village or family relationships in Capernaum, but also his skewed sense of Jesus' affirmation after being chosen to be a disciple. It's clear in Peter's pre-resurrection self that he had an enlarged sense of identity as a companion to Israel's long-awaited king. And I think that's probably what we all look for, right? Maybe not necessarily in a church context. I think probably by and large, people don't come to church looking for some sort of a position. But in your job, or maybe in your just circle of influence. You do look for that. Man, okay, if I can get this from that person, this promotion or that, then I must be doing good. So, but understand, all of this is fickle and temporal, right? So we see that, first of all, it comes from people who affirm me. Next, performance. Now this does land, I think, probably where most of us are, especially the church culture if we're not careful. I am what I do well. In our early childhood, we begin to form our identity based on behavior or performance that others applaud. Things we are good at, or things that provoke approval from others. Certain behaviors are rewarded and others are penalized. This sends us on a lifelong quest of performance-driven identity formation. We become subtly plagued by the idea, I am what I do. I am what I'm good at. I need others to approve of me. Performing well makes me valuable. Failing to perform makes me a failure. Anybody kind of feel that? And I don't know that there's anything wrong necessarily with having, because we'll allude to it here later, but having the reward system, if you would. You know, you get an A for that, you get a B for that, and a C for that. If we're not careful, that becomes the driving force is what we're after. And honestly, all of this plays into a broken, fragile type of identity, and that's what we're trying to point out today. If we're not careful, the performance. You perform well, everybody applauds and accepts you. You must be such a good person. Hey, good job, good job, good job. Or if you fail, man, you must be a reject or go somewhere else. I don't know. Sometimes you feel that way, right? From there, the road of identity formation branches out into millions of directions as I seek to discover what I do well and fulfill the expectations of various figures in my life: parents, coaches, teachers, mentors, bosses, and role models. In Peter's case, he could fish well. No wonder Jesus disrupted his identity with 2 incidents of fishless nights, at which point Jesus nearly sank 2 boats with more fish than Peter had ever seen at one time. And Jesus was beginning to reveal to Peter his fragile identity. Who am I if I'm a fisherman who can't catch fish? And who is this man that has the power to fill my life with fish? And he desired to reveal his power to more durably and authoritatively define Peter. Isn't that what we want? Don't we want durable and authoritative definition in our world? Absolutely. And the only person who can do that is Christ. But here's the thing. Performance-based identity is powerful in all of us. If we're honest with ourselves, that's the main reason why sometimes we go to church. Like, oh man, if I don't go to church, then what are they going to think of me? What is my family going to think? What is God going to think? Right? Now, I'm not telling you to stop coming if that's your main reason in coming, because I'd much rather you be in church, not do it for me, but ultimately, you'd much rather be in church than not. But if you're like, man, the only reason why I go to church is I want people to affirm me. I want that pat on the back. I want God to do X, Y, and Z for me. Well, you're in the wrong business. You're in the wrong lane, I should say, not business. It's not a business. But think about this. If I'm athletic, I perform in sports. Winning becomes my identity source. Losing becomes my threat. If I'm artistic, I perform creatively for validation. Rejection of my art becomes my threat. We perform in many ways, from trying to win the love of another, to winning a scholarship, to attempting to win God's forgiveness through good works or religious devotion. Again, that's the danger in this part of it. In the real world out there, the identity and trying to perform and being faithful and being consistent, it matters, right? If you're not consistent on your job, then yes, you're going to lose some things. If you're not consistent in your bills, then yeah, you're going to lose some things. If you don't study hard in school, you're going to lose some things. So this isn't necessarily taking a jab at it as much as it is we cannot latch everything into it. Does that make sense? We achieve hoping to find a strong sense of self. If I am what I do, then working harder becomes the essence of my identity. And it's driven to its ultimate edges by comparison and competition with others. By the way, that is a dangerous place to be in church. Let me say that again. If I am what I do, then working harder becomes the essence of my identity, and it's driven to the ultimate edges by comparison and competition with others. We sit in church and we think, well, I'm not as bad as X, Y, and Z over there. I haven't said, I haven't done, or at least I'm in church and they're not. Comparison. This is not the essence of who we are as a born again believer. If I consistently rise to or exceed the standards set by others, if I'm as good as or better than others, then I enjoy a strong sense of identity. If I fail in comparison to others or in light of others' expectations, I suffer the loss of identity. And ultimately, in a church context, people leave church. It's not good enough. Why should I keep going? I just don't match up. I can't. I'm always failing. And yeah, you probably feel that way. Especially if your context has always been performance driven. Work or achievement is not the enemy, though. Weak identity construction is. God created us to live fruitful lives, but He never intended that our doing would actually come to define us. Does that make sense? He didn't say, do this and I will receive you. He didn't. He has always received us. He has always loved us. We literally have done absolutely zero, zilch, nada to achieve any type of love that He has for us. So I want you to think about that. Probably one of the biggest things I want us to grasp at Cottonwood is we are not a performance-based church. We shouldn't be. We shouldn't demand that of others. This is grace motivated, and that's what we're after. We're getting there in all of this, but I promise you, if we are all about the performance, then we will drive people away, even ourselves. Eventually we'll crash underneath us. We intuitively know our value should not depend on our achievements. Over the course of many years, performance-based acceptance, though, becomes psychologically exhausting as we strive to meet other standards in order to gain a merely conditional acceptance. This flimsy conditionality hurts because we long to be loved as beings, I like this, not merely as doings. Loved for who we are, not merely for what we do. Anybody with me? That's why Jesus' love makes so much, it rings so true for all of us. Because He loves us just because He loves us. He loves Andrew because he's Andrew, not because of what Andrew has done. He loves Bernie because he loves Bernie, not because of what Bernie has done. He loves all of us because of that. And ultimately, external thises and that's are really it's gonna flounder and fail because you didn't do that X, Y, or Z, or right, A, B, or C. Are we with me? So I'm almost we're wrapping it up closely here, but let me just say that one more time. Over the course of many years, performance-based acceptance becomes psychologically exhausting as we strive to meet other standards in order to gain merely conditional acceptance. This is This is the problem, or a problem, I should say, with the performance-driven church, is that who sets the standard? Many cases, it's the pastor. You know? And he's like, okay, well, if you don't match this, then we must be failing. As the pastor, because I could, even myself, I could almost have a goal, a thought. Okay, if our members aren't doing X, Y, Z, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, then our ministry must be failing. So then that in turn turns me to, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that, here's this, here's that, and this is the standard, if we're not doing this, if we're not doing that, then we must not be, when really, truly, the motivation is the love of God. And we want to do it because we love Him, not because we feel like we owe it, or because we feel like we have to earn it. So, last two here before we get into the end here. Possessions. I am what I own. Consumer culture programs us for discontentment and drives us to strive for material identity. Marketers tell us it's our money, our possessions, and pleasures that define us. We brand ourselves as winners, projecting a contrived self through clothing, cars, accessories, and company brands. Material identity is weak. If I have it, I'm validated. If I lose it, I'm lost. There will always be the next style, newest gadget, or cooler look. Like a carrot on a stick, material success tempts me to chase just out of reach new and improved self, but never conserves the best self it promotes. Really, truly, if it was that style, then why didn't they stop with that style? Right? Bell bottoms? Afros, and I would be way out of style if that was the case. I can relate to this because growing up, when I was a high schooler, Tommy Hilfiger and Nike. I think Nike is still kind of a thing. I don't know. Tommy Hilfiger, Nike, Air Jordan. I don't know.
Clothes with the labels.
Yeah, all of those things. Absolutely. You had to have it, right?
You weren't nothing.
And so, exactly what this, if you had it, man, I must be something. And in fact, here's my story. it just came to me. I don't know why I'm remembering this. I had this Tommy Hilfiger t-shirt, and I bought it from like a Ross, whatever that is, a consignment type store. And all it has, it was all white, but right here on the collar, it had the Tommy Hilfiger. It was red on one side and white on the other, and it had the little. Yeah. I thought, wow, this is cool. I was so proud of that. We were having a 4th of July celebration, and one of my friends thought he was going to be smart and threw a snap pop at me. It hit me right there. Boom! Red, the burn mark right there on my chest. And that's not coming out. So my Tommy Hilfiger identity went crashing down the drains that day. Anybody else knows, right? You could probably relate. What I own. You own a bass boat. You own today I think I see a lot of people going into debt for these silly side-by-sides. These things, you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. They're like, those things are like 30 grand. I'm like, man, I don't even know if I've spent that much money on a car. And they use that to drive these things up and down the road so they can be like their friends. Now again, listen, if you can own these things, great. This is not a jab at owning a Tommy Hilfiger shirt, even though whatever, if you want to give your money to that guy, go for it. But or driving a side-by-side or owning a basket. It's not a jab at that, but if you have to have that to validate it, that's where it gets weak and fragile, and honestly, it's not biblical. By contrast, our hearts long for real rest and contentment. We all hope to arrive someday at a destination where our needs and wants are finally fulfilled, don't we? Well, okay, if I could just get, remember, how many of you have heard this phrase? My dream house. Huh? Have you uttered those words? Or you just know, okay, that would be the perfect, boom. Okay? And if we don't achieve that, if we don't acquire that, then obviously the identity is not validated. Are you with me on that? So it's possessions. So we've seen people, let me see, make sure I remember all this before I knock them all on the floor here. People, performance, and possessions. Lastly, purpose. I am what I desire or dream. So we're going to unpack this a little bit more later, but this identity attempts to come from within more than without. It says, my feelings or desires reflect my deepest, truest self. My dreams define me. This identity search attempts a psychological deep dive of self-discovery. It elevates individuality, shakes off external expectations, and draws us towards self-made definitions and deified emotional desires. He spends a little bit more time on this. That's why there's not a whole lot right here. But there is a movement in our world that is like, just be what you want to be. So it just really looks internal. And to an extent, it's a good thing because it does kind of shake off the demands of materialism in a sense, the demands of the performance-based stuff in a sense. But if you're not careful, and really like he said there, it begins to elevate self. It's a dangerous place as well. This identity isn't only fragile, it's actually volatile. Desires often change and conflict, or they can mature and grow over time. God designed us to pursue and realize big dreams and powerful purposes, but they were never designed to own or define us. So, we have to be careful with what we say. Now, there's a story, a thing in here where it's like, the guy said this is kind of like, it's kind of like being in the grocery store, and on one side of the aisle, there's the magazines that, really we shouldn't, they shouldn't be there in most cases, that show you, well, this is what you ought to look like. You need to have this self, this look. But then on the other side, there's the Reese's candy bars. And there's the jerky, and there's the Mountain Dew, and there's the, right? So it's the conflicting, because my self desires the external here or the internal here. You understand that it's all volatile, and it's all actually goes against itself. So he alluded to this, and we're going to close before we have open up for questions. We'll close here, but the temporal identity factors. He alluded to this. Generally speaking, we shape a sense of self by some combination of this following list. When well ordered in its rightful place, every one of these factors is a good gift from God. There's nothing wrong with appreciating, celebrating, cherishing, or developing these facets of our lives. But when elevated to an identity, each one fails and proves insufficient. Disordered and disproportioned identity factors become self-destructive. All of them combined could nearly never wholly define me. So, first of all, and not necessarily in this order, but we see, are they listed on that? I don't think they are. The world's identity factors. First, we see race, ethnicity, or culture. I am my ethnicity or culture. Ethnicity elevated to an identity fuels our tendencies toward racism and prejudice. Now, we've seen this kind of rise and even reach a fever pitch in our nation. Right? No, I won't go there. But you understand what I'm saying. Like, we can use race as that calling card, and my culture, this is who I am. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with it. God made you that way, right? Ain't nothing wrong with it. But when we elevate that, that's where we have a problem. Family of origin is the next one. I am my familial heritage. This reduces us to nothing more than the beneficiaries or victims of our family tree. One of the main problems I see in this one is when people tend to blame their family for maybe a drug addiction or alcohol addiction or you see kids, spoiled kids that grew up in a well-to-do homes, and they're just kind of like, and parents kind of tend to just give them that ends up hurting the cause more than helping. But when somebody claims, well, my family of origin, they've just always been drunkards, so I must be a drunkard. That's not true. Family of origin does not define you in that way. It's a decision you get to make. Everybody here knows that, by the way. We don't need to use that as a crutch to why we can't get over something that's hindering our relationship with Christ. Second, so first of all, race and ethnicity. Second, family of origin. Third, religion or moral performance. I am a good religious person, and this fuses our identities with systemized behavior and imprisons us to perpetual performance. Man, I got to go to church. Now, going to church does actually, it is a fruit, I should say, of a proper relationship and a proper identity in Christ. I promise you that. But when it's out in the forefront is what we're talking about. That's the problem. Religion, moral performance. Next, gender. Of course, today I am whatever gender I choose. Gender is redefined as purely psychological choice, shattering male and female binaries and forcing us to experiment with dozens of contrived options. Next, sexual orientation. I am my sexual desires, lusts, and physical passions reduce us to merely sexual beings. Wealth and possessions. I am my money or stuff. I have this amount of money saved up, or this amount of money in my 401k. Power, status, personal capacity. I am my abilities. Personal accomplishments create an insatiable desire for drive for increased capacity and achievement. Number 8, love or romance. I am my attractional qualities. Romantic relationships become absolute and essential for feeling personal worth and acceptance. Number 9, past abuse or victimization. I am my bruises. Wounds and past hurts can never heal because they have come to define us. Number 10, failure or regrets. Am I going too fast? I know some of you are trying to take notes, and so scream if I'm going too fast. Failure and regrets. I am my regrets and mistakes. Bad decisions become permanent, unforgivable, and unrecoverable regrets. I'm sure we've been there. Social media, fake identity. Oh man, this one's big, right? You put whatever you want out there and show it. Like, I am my profile. Generation, number 12, generation or age. I am a millennial. Generation X. Whatever you are. I don't know. I tend to be I'm an 80s baby, so whatever that means. I grew up in... I don't know what that means. They have us labeled, but right, you're a generation. Number 13, function and abilities. I am for example, a speaker, a leader, a superintendent. Okay. Number 14, relationships and friends. I am who accepts me. Finding friends, fitting in, fearing rejection, becoming our primary drives in life. Number 15, occupation or career. I am my career. Vocational success elevated to identity will cause us to devalue people and steamroll over more valuable priorities. The world sees that pretty clearly, but they don't care about it either. They know you just got to step over who you stand. Dog eat dog world out there. And they kind of wear it as a label, right? Last one he has written down is personality. I am my temperament type. For example, I'm an introvert, I'm an extrovert, I'm funny, relatable, etc. They compartmentalize us onto spreadsheets and numbered grids to make us feel as though we don't even understand ourselves. So can you see how each of these things may be true, or at least partly true, meaningful and helpful, but they can never be comprehensively defining. Each one is insufficient and can be destructively disproportioned in our identity structures. After considering these factors, we might say, I understand that I am more than merely these things, merely a personality, merely occupation, so forth. In fact, it might be helpful for you to read the list again, but with each factor say, I am more than my ethnicity. I am more than my family history. Right? We desperately need deeper, stronger, more durable definitions. So, with that being said, we open this lesson, or we close this lesson with the discussions. I want to ask us, as we've kind of walked through, we've seen Peter's story. What part of Peter's story do you see in your own story? And this is just discussion. So raise your hand and say, you know what? Of course, all of you, we don't all have to speak. And if you don't feel like speaking, you don't feel like being that vulnerable, then I understand. But what part of Peter's story can you see in your own? Anybody? What was Peter's story? Well, I think probably for me, I can say that, I do have that tendency to be bold and unashamed in times, but then when the rubber meets the road, I fail. I've had that. I hate to admit it, but I have had that. Anybody else?
Focusing on performance-based. I evaluate myself on, what I am and what I've done, and that, God must not love me if I haven't done this.
Sure.
Church must not accept me, or society must accept me.
Absolutely. Anybody else on that one? Okay, now how is Jesus breaking or revealing Peter's weak identity structures actually helping him? Does anybody remember?
Because he's relying on the wrong thing.
Right.
He's not just efficient. His abilities were, he fails. If he'd hurt his back or he'd done something and he could never fish again, that wasn't the end of the world. That
Sure.
wasn't the end of his ministry. He was relying on the wrong things. And by revealing that, he was able to see, I thought I was such a great person to be so bold and everything. But when it really comes down to it, without God, I really can't do it. And Jesus showed that through his, you'll deny me 3 times.
There you go. Anybody else? So I think too that Peter, he recognized that he had these strengths, which is a good thing, and really the world tells you to focus in on that. But by removing that, and it kind of speaks into what she's saying there, but by removing that, and this is what you're going to find out as we walk through this journey, ultimately you're left with, especially as a believer. I don't know what the non-believers are because I've not walked this journey with them in this, but as a believer, you're left with Christ. And it's like, how unfair is that? No, how fair that is. It's unfair for us to treat him like that. And sometimes he does have to break it all down for us to see exactly how weak we actually are. Anybody have anything else on that? We have one more question. Okay. Looking back at the main passage in Habakkuk, how would this speak into our identity? And what would encourage your soul from this passage? Again, you kind of see